Good afternoon. We are back with yet another episode of WIF Vichaar, and I, Isha Tripathi, co-head of finance at the Warwick India Forum, am your host for today. We have an exceptional guest with us for this episode, Mr. Gaurav Natekar. Mr. Natekar is an Arjuna awardee and a 7-time national tennis champion in every age group. He went on to represent India at the Davis Cup and Asian Games in 1994 in Hiroshima, where he was a double gold medalist. He is also the founder of Natekar Sports and Fitness, which is in the business of advising sport infrastructure academies. Off the court, Gauravji is a sport advisor to companies like Tata Trust and Grant Thornton, and is also a member of the CII National Committee for Sports that is driving change in India through various government and private initiatives. It is a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Natekar.
Thank you. Thank you, Isha. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so I'm very excited because I myself am a football player, and I'm very curious to see how with the COVID-19 everything is changing, and it's such an honor to have you with us. So I have a few questions prepared, and I'd love to get into them, if that's all right.
Sure.
Awesome. So the first question from my side would be, what was your reason behind entering the field of tennis? Was it perhaps your father, Mr. Nandu Natekar, who was one of the first recipients of the Arjuna Award? Or was it something else that motivated you?
Well, actually, when you're 5, 6 or 7 years old, you really don't know what your parents do for a living or what their career is. So I really didn't know what a big name my father was and how much he had achieved. We used to live in Thar, which is a suburb in Bombay. Well, it's no more a suburb, but and our balcony and our house used to overlook the Thar Gymkhana and overlook the tennis courts and the swimming pool and things. So that obviously caught my attention as a 5, 6-year-old. And my father and my mother, who was a doctor, they were very keen that I play some sport just to stay fit. I never really enjoyed the indoors. So my father, thankfully didn't force me into playing badminton or any sport. He just told me to go and play a few sports. So at the age of 6 or 7, I was playing tennis, I was doing swimming, I was playing a little badminton here and there. But tennis really caught my fancy because I really love the outdoors. Even today, I'd much prefer to be outdoors than indoors. And that's where tennis caught my fancy. And, one thing led to another. And I started winning tournaments at a very young age. And, that really motivated me to go on and try and do better.
Lovely. So this whole kind of notion of winning tournaments had led you to become a 7-time Indian national tennis champion. What do you feel sets you apart from the rest of the crowd?
So I think the 7 national champions, tennis championships were singles, doubles, and all of them put together. In the juniors as well, I won many national titles. I think really growing up, obviously I was lucky to have God-given a talent. The genetic pool was very strong. But I think what really made me different was my hunger to win. When I was growing up, I had this hunger to win and to do my best when I stepped on the tennis court. And I remember the first couple of times when I won some matches, every time my name would come in the newspaper, it obviously gives you a big kick. And it was always followed by a line saying, trying to emulate his father or following in the footsteps of his father. And as a young kid, especially as a young boy, your father is obviously one of your early role models. And for me, to see my name being mentioned along with him was a great motivator for me. So I would say that really it was my hunger to win and my desire to go out there and practice every day that really made the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you tell us perhaps some challenges you overcame through your journey as a tennis player? For instance, how difficult was it to manage both academics and sports?
So I think that's always a challenge growing up for any kid. I mean, I was lucky to be picked up by the Britannia Amritsar Tennis Foundation, which selected 8 of the top players in the country. And, it was a residential tennis academy with schooling in Chennai, which was run by Vijay Amritraj and sponsored by Britannia. So our schedule was really, really brutal. I mean, we used to wake up at 5:30 a.m. We used to play from 6:15 to about 8:15, 8:30, then go to school for about 5 hours. Then again play and do our physical training after that, then go back and have an hour or so of tuitions, have dinner and then sleep. This was pretty much the routine that I did for about 15 to 18 years of my life. And the challenges are always there. Every day is a challenge. When you're getting up every day, trying to be better than what you were the previous day. And I keep telling everybody that when you get a degree, whether it's a doctor's degree or an engineer's degree, that degree remains with you for the rest of your life. But when you're playing a sport, every day you start from zero, right? You could have won the previous day, you could have won the match the previous day, or you could have won the tournament the previous day. You could have won Wimbledon the previous day and then go and lose in the first round the next day. And I think that is really the biggest challenge in sport, is that every day is a new day. Every day your body is feeling different, mentally you're feeling different, your opponent is different, the climate is different. There are so many varying factors that get thrown up when you're playing a sport. I think off the court, the challenges really were trying to live up to my father's name. As I grew up, obviously, I started realizing what my father had achieved. So that put some positive pressure on me, but also a lot of negative pressure from people around me and from the media and stuff. And I think it's just one of those things that one has to learn to combat and fight. And I think that's why it's so important for children and youngsters to play sport, because without realizing it, they are able to, face challenges on a day-to-day basis and come out on tops.
Absolutely. Sports is such an important aspect of life. Now, I would just like to dial it back to probably present day, and I think the most pressing question. With this ongoing pandemic, how do you feel that the COVID-19 has affected the future sports, especially tennis?
So I think it's too early to say. Definitely for the rest of the year, for the rest of 2020, it looks like there's not going to be too many sporting events. If you look at tennis, there has been a huge change, because most of the big events have been cancelled, including the French Open and Wimbledon. I think Wimbledon, for the first time in its 100 odd years, is except for the World War, when the World War was or World War II was on, that it's been cancelled. So these are definitely very, very trying times. I think it's going to be at the top level of tennis, when you look at a Federer or a Nadal, not having one Wimbledon or the Olympics being postponed by a year is a matter of huge concern, because in 1 year, you don't know at their age and at their fitness levels how fit they would be to play. At the lower level, I think it's really, really sad, because a lot of the younger players, the players lower down in the order, are going to struggle. They are not going to earn any money for the rest of the year, or almost negligible money for the rest of the year. And I'm not even talking about the coaches, the trainers, the support staff, the ball kids, the people who mow the lawns at Wimbledon, or the volunteers, and so many of them. So I think it's going to be impacted hugely. Um, from a global sports perspective, obviously the Olympics being postponed is again not great, because most of the athletes train so hard to try and peak at the Olympics. And now all their training and all of that is thrown out of gear. Again, a lot of athletes would have been looking at this as their last Olympics, and a 1 year postponement again throws a lot of spanner in the works for the older athletes. For a lot of other athletes, most of them play only or compete in only one Olympics in their lifetime. And an Olympics again being postponed for a year, one never knows in 1 year whether a particular athlete who was fit and had been selected for this Olympics would be in top condition or would be selected and things. So I think there's a lot of turmoil mentally, physically, of course, but mentally and financially as well, for the athletes and for the sports people.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the Olympics, I wanted to probably broach the area of India and its Olympic run. With such a large population, we have quite a low medal count. Do you think India's Olympic history can be deemed a disappointment?
Well, I think it's very easy to say. The easiest argument, and everybody makes this argument, is, oh, we have 1.3 billion people, or we have a billion plus people, and we have only one Olympic gold medalist, which is Abhinav Bindra. But my counter to that is, yes, we may have a billion people, but how many of them actually have access to sport? How many kids actually get to play sport? How many of them get to have basic infrastructure and have the money to actually even play sport and learn it then at a professional level? very, very minuscule. It takes $0.96 billion to make an Olympic champion. And there are so many instances in India of amazing talent, unfortunately not being nurtured properly and not being handheld and taken care of, and then they fall by the wayside. So I think it's a very unfair comparison. But if you look at the results over the last 5 to 10 years, I think you will see that there is a lot of medals that India are winning, whether it's at the Asian Games, whether it's at the Olympics and things. And I think things are only going to improve. I mean, look at a country like UK. They had very few medals 3 Olympics back, and then when they won the bid for the 2012 Olympics, there was a sustained and a focused and structured plan to make sure that they are not embarrassed when they actually host the Olympics. And I think in a span of 8 or 10 years, they were the third highest medal tally, if I'm not mistaken. Now, if England or UK with so much money at their disposal, so much of infrastructure, the latest training techniques and all of that, was struggling to win medals, I think India should be given a little bit more respect. And I'm confident that in the coming years, we will see that statistic change.
Yeah, I hope for that too, honestly. We deserve much more than we get. So moving on, like golf, badminton, or even chess, tennis is a social distancing sport, quote unquote. So do you think that this will kind of fast track the return of such sports versus traditionally contact sports like wrestling and football?
I think definitely. I mean, honestly, there's no logic. I find no logic in, for example, a golf course being shut. I mean, what better example of social distancing than a golf course where you have 150 acres, and at any given point you may have maybe 100 players playing, 150 players playing max, right? Yes, certainly there are some sports like swimming or contact sport, like you said, like boxing or wrestling, where they will have to be more careful and they will have to delay its return. But I think, football has already started. Bundesliga has started, obviously, without the spectators and certain other rules thrown in. And I think that is going to be the new normal. But I find absolutely no reason why outdoor sports like tennis should not be started. I mean, at the end of the day, on the one hand, we are talking about building immunity, and on the other hand, we are not allowing anybody to go out and play and exercise. So, it really defeats the whole purpose of then speaking about building immunity, because the first thing about building immunity is to be fit, whether it's by way of playing a sport or exercising or walking or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. So, what is your opinion on practicing distance sports or solo sports during this pandemic?
Look, I think that they should allow sports which, in any case, maintain social distancing. It's obviously going to be unfair on some sports which are physical contact sport, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. I think that painting the whole canvas with a single brush by saying that, okay, we are not going to start all sports, or we are going to start all sports together, really doesn't make sense. And I think the sooner they start some sports which do have social distancing by way of the rules, it will also give confidence to a lot of the other people in the ecosystem and other sports people that, okay, they have started some sports. It's only a matter of time before our sport gets off the ground as well.
Yeah. And as you just mentioned previously, the Bundesliga had opened 16th of May, and the Premier League is cleared to return in June. And other such sports are kind of resurfacing. Do you think it is wise for Sports League to return this soon from a coronavirus shutdown?
Again, I think it depends on the sport. There's so much of money riding and so much of money lost already. I mean, leave alone the Olympics. But I don't see how they can start leagues without having spectators, without having all the other rules in place. I mean, spectators make a huge difference to the performance of an athlete or a sports person. They get motivated, by the cheering, and sometimes get motivated even by the booing and by the cheering. sponsors are going to not want to spend money if there are no spectators. TV production and telecast of sports events, which is such a huge revenue earner, is also going to go through a different path, because unless there are spectators and people are buying tickets and watching it on TV, it's not going to be very easy to have these leaks. So I think that, again, one has to be prudent. One has to look at and consider a lot of things before really going ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was watching the Bundesliga yesterday, and it was so odd to see no crowd, and I could actually hear the players, which was quite a shock. But as you said, sports has really become sort of this business incentive. So thank you for that. And I'm going to conclude this interview with one last question, which would be, what message would you like to give aspiring sports players who wish to achieve your height of success?
Well, I think it sounds very cliched, but I think the first thing is to enjoy playing a sport. And I think the parents today, I keep, guiding and trying to counsel a lot of the parents through our academies and our infrastructure and our sports business. A lot of parents today are trying to push their dreams or trying to live their dreams through their child. And I think that is absolutely a recipe for disaster. I think when we are kids, all we want to do is play because we enjoy the sport. And I think it's important for the children to enjoy the sport. I think it's important for them to play multiple sports till the age of 11 or 12, so that they build up their body physically. There's an all-round development, because obviously when you play a particular sport, there are only a certain set of muscles that get built or that get strong. I think it's also important to play one individual and one team sport when you're young, because playing in a team sport makes the child realize how to work in a team, how to work with your teammates, and so on and so forth, which obviously will help him later on in life. And an individual sport like tennis or badminton makes one realize the decision making. In a split second, you have to take so many decisions. So that also becomes important. So I would say just let the kids enjoy, let them play. If at the age of 11, 12, 13, they decide to take over and play a sport and try and do it professionally, that's great. If not, they will choose their own path anyway.
Thank you for that message. And that kind of brings us to the end of this interview, sir. It has been my pleasure to host you, and we at WIF would like to thank you for the insight you have provided us with. And I'm sure your talk will help all our sports players at university to remain motivated and not lose hope during these times. We hope you and your family continue to remain safe and in good health during these trying times. Thank you so much.
Thank you.